Hello again and welcome to another Warhammer 40k Imperial Guard Tactics video. So today's video is going to be following on from my Horde Armies 101 video. I got a lot of positive feedback on that upload, and so I've decided to do another 101 video just covering the basics of a mechanized infantry Imperial Guard list. Now this, as always, can be applied to a variety of armies, and even variety of gaming systems, but obviously is primarily focused on Imperial Guard because that's what the channel's all about, and that's where most of my experience comes from. But there will be some abstract concepts you will be able to glean from this if you're like a Space Marine player or another sort of player who uses mechanized units. So, what do I mean by mechanized? Well, this is the key thing. A lot of people get mechanized and armoured mixed up. I will probably do an armoured 101 video, but armoured is where the core of your army is tanks, whereas mechanized is where the core of your army is infantry, which is supported by vehicles. But the key to success is your infantry. Okay. Now, I don't mean a hybrid list here. I don't mean footbound infantry. I mean mounted infantry. Infantry which are in some kind of transport. Okay, I want to clarify that. Okay, mechanized infantry, literally infantry which are in a transport, a mechanized transport. Now, there are some... I was never a mech commander until 8th edition, and then I just decided that what with the channel getting successful, I wanted to become a mechanized commander, and so a lot of my experience is directly learned from 8th edition, but I've played against many mech lists, and for the longest time mechanized was the go-to guard choice, and I've used mech on and off for a long time, but obviously was always an infantry commander at heart. But with 8th edition, I really have been practicing with mechanized infantry, so hopefully I'll have some pretty good tactics to pass on to you, or insights, I should say. So the first thing that I want to mention is mechanized lists are tough, but they're not invincible. Okay, what you tend to find is that your infantry are safe inside their transports, and that your transports, my preferred one being the Chimera, are pretty good at being durable against small arms fire. You're pretty good at surviving bolter rounds, and even heavy bolters. Anything up to an autocannon, you're pretty okay at. Your vehicles will keep you safe. But transports get popped very easily by dedicated anti-tank. So don't think just because you're all mech'd up and you're all in vehicles that you're invincible. You're not, okay? What we've got to remember is the vast majority of your vehicles in a mechanized list are going to be light armor, okay? You're not going to have a lot of heavily armored types. In my mechanized list, I have 6 Chimeras and 3 Sentinels. That makes up the bulk of my armor. I only have 4 Leman Russes, okay? So you have to appreciate that it's not that hard for a las cannon or two to just blow up a Chimera. It's just not that hard. I mean, I tend to find that if a Devastator squad, just without much support whatsoever, points 4 missile launchers at one of my Chimeras, it's going to go pop. There's nothing that I can do about that. It's going to happen. So that gives you an idea, whereas a Leman Russ has a pretty good chance of withstanding that firepower. So you're tough, but you're not invincible. Second thing is, and I've sort of already mentioned this, is that you are not going, again, a bit like the Horde 101, you're not going to have any really big swingy turns. You'll have some, but you won't really have the raw firepower of an armoured list. Okay, you have some tanks, but again, you are infantry supported by tanks. Okay, your Chimeras will put out a relatively decent amount of firepower, especially if you go for the double heavy bolter ones, the Gryphon pattern from Forge World. But even my chimeras, which I've got 2 heavy bolters and a heavy sword, that's 9 shots each, plus the guys inside firing 6 lasgun shots. Even with those sort of, I don't really count the lasgun shots. It's 9 shots. I only have 6 chimeras. Okay, so that's only 54 shots that I get from my chimeras, which isn't a huge amount. If you actually take into account just the chimeras themselves, that's 6 shots times 6. It's only 36 heavy bolter rounds. Now, what you've got to understand is that only half of those are going to hit. And we don't really count the heavy stubbers, so the heavy stubbers are nice, but they'll kill 1 or 2 things a game, maybe 3. But the heavy bolters, it's 36 shots, it's only 18 hits. Now, if you're shooting infantry with those, that's fine. But any of the hard targets that you'll be shooting against, you're going to struggle. Okay, now you have some tanks. You'll have maybe a couple of artillery and a couple of tanks. But again, they're probably going to be drawing a lot of enemy firepower early on. So don't... Your infantry is key. Your infantry will be grabbing objectives. They'll be jumping out. They'll be first rank fire, second rank fire. They'll be jumping back in. Your tanks do a lot of damage, but they're more of a big shoot me distraction. They're not definitely going to win big boom tanks. They do a lot of damage, don't get me wrong, but they're not the core of your army. At the end of the day, the core of your army is your mounted mechanized infantry. Okay. Speaking of mechanized infantry, as I pointed out, they don't do a huge amount of damage. They'll do plenty, but the main point of them is mobility. You have to be able to take advantage of mobility as a mechanized list. Okay? You have the ability to jump forward. Even with Lehman Russes, if you move in advance and then you full throttle, you have the ability to really jump forward very quickly. Mechanized list should always be getting line breaker. That's the whole point. You have mobility. But at the same time, you don't want to be moving for the sake of moving unless you're Talon. Talon are really, they ignore moving with heavy weapons. But if you meet like Armageddon Steel Legion, what you'll find is you'll send off your lone wolf squads to do some harassing. But what you'll do is you'll sit back for a turn, have a full turn of firepower, and then you hit the enemy when you've weakened them, and you blitzkrieg them, and you use that mobility to be really key, inserting squads onto objectives. This comes to my 4th point, which is don't jump out of your chimeras too early. Or if you're a space marine, don't jump out of your rhino. Essentially, don't jump out of your transports really, too early. My infantry will regularly stay inside the transports until turn 3. Now, some of you might be saying, well, what's the point then? You've got squads inside that aren't doing anything. Well, basically, my squads are quite cheap. They're 48 points. They're an infantry squad with a plasma gun and a bolter. And the point of them is that the reason they're cheap is because that I know that half the game they're not going to be doing anything. They'll be firing the chimeras from the side, the lasers from the side of the chimera, but I've kept them cheap so they don't waste too much of my points. But if you jump out too early with your infantry, you'll just get absolutely shredded. It's really vitally important that you spend a turn or 2, normally turn 1 and 2, really dedicating yourself to crippling your enemy's firepower. Okay, got a bit of a dry throat. Sorry, guys. Let me take a quick drink. That's better. Yeah, you've really got to dedicate yourself to making sure you're killing your enemy's firepower in the first 1 or 2 turns. Don't worry about his infantry too much. Don't worry about his own, like, maybe you've got Dark Elves or Warriors in Vellums. Don't worry about that shit too much. You really just need to be focusing on removing his main firepower so that your infantry will have a better chance of surviving. Because at the end of the day, in my mechanized film, I still have 60 infantry, and I tend to find that when I kill the enemy, when my tanks are killing the enemy toy breakers, kill the enemy toys, my tanks are toy breakers. My infantry, I have the numbers still to win the ground game. Every single one of my squads has access to an order, and 60 infantry jumping out with first rank fire, second rank fire in an 18-inch rapid fire range with las guns, bolters, and plasma guns. That does a hell of a lot of damage. Now, the last thing I want to say is that The difference between a mechanized list and an armoured list is the way you screen. Okay, so as we've said, your tanks are there to support your infantry, but that also includes screening your infantry. Now, in a normal Imperial Guard list, you use your infantry to screen your tanks. In a mechanized list, you'll often find yourself screening your infantry with your tanks. Does that make sense? So normally your tanks will form a line and stop the enemy from getting into your firepower. In a mechanized list, you know, maybe you've jumped out and you've got a squad on an objective, but there's an enemy tactical marine or assault marine unit there, which could really get in amongst your guardsmen and tear them to pieces. Now, what you want to do is basically charge your Chimera into that unit. Now, that seems to be counterproductive because the Chimera's firepower will be wasted, blah, blah, blah. What you have to ask yourself is, does this Chimera, let's say you've got an infantry squad that's jumped out and a Chimera versus a 10-man assault marine unit. Or Vanguard veteran, I know assault marines aren't very popular. Or a 10-man tactical unit. What you have to ask yourself is that Chimera going to do enough damage to that assault squad or tactical squad? Is it going to do enough damage to stop them from wiping out my infantry squad next turn and me losing the objective? Maybe you've got to defend objective. You've got that Maelstrom card. If the answer is no, which it will most certainly be no, then you have to say, well, how am I going to stop that squad from stopping me from getting those points? Charge my Chimera in. Your Chimera will absorb all the Overwatch pretty easily. Even if the enemy's got a special weapon in there, you're more than likely going to survive the Overwatch in the close combat. And then you're able to claim your objective, and you've screened with your Chimeras. Chimeras are really good at tying things up. Enemy firepower, most squads, unless they're rocking a Power Fist, strength 4. Well, that's winning a Chimera on 5s. A lot of assault armies, like Dark Elder, for example, they only strength 3. And so your Chimeras are really good at tying them up. So, there you go, guys. So just to reiterate, you are tough, but you're not invincible. Your core of your army is infantry, and you must not forget that infantry first, supported by tanks. Mobility is key. Okay, you don't underestimate the ability to be able to, in one turn, drive forward 12 inches and advance, and then the next turn, jump out 9 inches, advance, and then move. That will get you across the whole board in 2 turns. Very, very easily. Okay, so don't be afraid to use your mobility. But most importantly, don't jump out too early. Okay? And because you can't let all your infantry die. You need your infantry to win the game. And finally, you will be using your Chimeras to tie enemy units up and to screen your infantry and your main Leman Rusters. Okay? So, hope you guys have found this video useful. Please leave lots and lots of comments. If any of you want to send in any pictures for me to use in these videos, please post them to my Facebook. And if any of you want to support the channel, please follow the link to Patreon. I know I don't normally do a Patreon shout out, but it's been a while, so I thought I'd do a cheeky Patreon shout out. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.